terms of repression or law, but in terms of power. But the word power is apt to lead to a number of misunderstandings with respect to its nature, its form, and its unity. By power, I do not mean power as a group of institutions and mechanisms that ensure the subservience of the citizens of a given state. By power, I do not mean either a mode of subjugation which, in contrast to violence, has the form of rule. Finally, I do not have in mind a general system of domination exerted by one group over another, a system whose effects, through successive derivations, pervade the entire social body. Oh my God, what are you doing? Okay. The analysis, made in terms of power, must not assume that the sovereignty of the state, the form of the law, or the overall unity of a domination are given at the outset. Rather, these are only the terminal forms the power takes. It seems to me that power must be understood in the first instance as the multiplicity of force relations immanent in the sphere in which they operate, and which constitute their own organization, as the process which, through ceaseless struggles and confrontations, transforms, strengthens, or reverses them, as the support which these relations find in one another, thus forming a chain or a system, or on the contrary, the disjunctions and contradictions which isolate them from one another, and lastly, as strategies in which they take effect, whose general design or institutional crystallization is embodied in the state apparatus, in the formulation of the law, in the various social hegemonies. Power's condition of possibility, or in any case the viewpoint which permits one to understand its exercise, even more its peripheral effects, and which also makes it possible to use its mechanisms as a grid of intelligibility of the social order, must not be sought in the primary existence of a central point, in a unique source of sovereignty from which secondary and descendant forms would emanate. It is the moving substrate of force relations which, by virtue of their inequality, constantly engender states of power, but the latter are always local and unstable. The omnipresence of power, not because it has the privilege of consolidating everything under its invincible unity, but because it is produced from one moment to the next at every point, or rather in every relation from one point to another. Power is everywhere, not because it embraces everything, but because it comes from everywhere. And power, insofar as it is permanent, repetitious, inert, and self-reproducing, is simply the overall effect that emerges from all these mobilities, the concatenation that rests on each of them and seeks in turn to arrest their movement. One needs to be nominalistic, no doubt. Power is not an institution and not a structure. Neither is it a certain strength we are endowed with. It is the name of one of the attributes of a complex strategical situation in a particular society. Should we turn the expression around, then, and say that politics is war pursued by other means? If we still wish to maintain a separation between war and politics, we should postulate rather that this multiplicity of force relations can be coded, in part but never totally, either in the forms of war or in the form of politics. This would imply two different strategies, but the one always liable to switch into the other, for integrating these unbalanced, heterogeneous, unstable, and tense force relations. Continuing this line of discussion, we can advance a certain number of propositions. Power is not something that is acquired, seized, or shared, something that one holds on to or allows to slip away. Power is exercised from innumerable points in the interplay of non-egalitarian and mobile relations. Relations of power are not in a position of exteriority with respect to other types of relationships, economic processes, knowledge relationships, sexual relations, but are immanent in the latter. They are the immediate effects of the divisions, inequalities, and disequilibriums which occur in the latter, and conversely they are internal conditions of these differentiations. Relations of power are not in superstructural positions, with merely a role of prohibition or accompaniment. They have a directly productive role whenever they come into play. Power comes from below. That is, there is no binary and all-encompassing opposition between rulers and ruled at the root of power relations, and serving as a general matrix. No such duality extending from the top down and reacting on more and more limited groups to the very depths of the social body. One must suppose rather the main manifold relationships of force that take shape and come into play in the machinery of production. In families, limited groups, and institutions are the basis for wide-ranging effects of cleavage that run through the social body as a whole. These then form a general line of force that traverses the local oppositions and links them together. To be sure, they also bring about redistributions, realignments, homogenizations, serial arrangements, and convergences of force relations. Major dominations are the hegemonic effects that are sustained by all these confrontations. Power relations are both intentional and non-subjective. If in fact they are intelligible, this is not because they are the effect of another instance that explains them, but rather because they are imbued through and through with calculation. There is no power that is exercised without a series of aims and objectives. But this does not mean that it results from the choice or decision of an individual subject. Let us not look for the headquarters that presides over its rationality, neither the caste which governs, nor the groups which control the state apparatus, nor those who make the most important economic decisions, direct the entire network of power that functions in society and makes it function. The rationality of power is characterized by tactics that are often quite explicit at the restricted level where they are inscribed, the local cynicism of power. Tactics which, becoming connected to one another, attracting and propagating one another, but finding their base of support and their condition elsewhere, end by forming comprehensive systems. The logic is perfectly clear, the aims decipherable, and yet it is often the case that no one is there to have invented them. Few can be said to have formulated them. An implicit characteristic of the great anonymous, almost unspoken strategies which coordinate the loquacious tactics whose inventors or decision-makers are often without hypocrisy. Where there is power, there is resistance. And yet, or rather consequently, this resistance is never in a position of exteriority in relation to power. Should it be said that one is always inside power, that there is no escaping it, there is no absolute outside where it is concerned, because one is subject to the law in any case, or that, history being the ruse of reason, power is the ruse of history, always emerging the winner? This would be to misunderstand the strictly relational character of power relationships. Their existence depends on a multiplicity of points of resistance. These play the role of adversary, target, support, or handle in power relations. These points of resistance are present everywhere in the power network. Hence there is no single locus of great refusal, no soul of revolt, source of all rebellions, or pure law of the revolutionary. Instead, there is a plurality of resistances, each of them a special case. Resistances that are possible, necessary, improbable, others that are spontaneous, savage, solitary, concerted, rampant, or violent, still others that are quick to compromise, interested, or sacrificial. By definition, they can only exist in the strategic field of power relations. But this does not mean that they are only a reaction or rebound forming with respect to the basic domination, an underside that is always, in the end, passive, doomed to perpetual defeat. Resistances do not derive from a few heterogeneous principles, but neither are they a lure or promise that is of necessity betrayed. They are the odd term in relations of power. They are inscribed in the latter as an irreducible opposite. Hence, they too are distributed in a regular fashion. The points, knots, or focuses of resistance are spread over time and space at varying densities, at times mobilizing groups or individuals in a definitive way, inflaming certain points of the body, certain moments in life, certain types of behavior. Are there no great radical ruptures, massive binary divisions, then? Occasionally, yes. But more often one is dealing with mobile and transitory points of resistance, producing cleavages in society that shift about, fracturing unities and affecting regroupings, furrowing across individuals themselves, cutting them up and remolding them, marking off irreducible regions in them, in their bodies and minds. Just as the network of power relation ends by forming a dense web that passes through apparatuses and institutions without being exactly localized in them, so too the swarm of points of resistance traverses social stratifications and individual unities. And it is doubtless the strategic codification of these points of resistance that makes a revolution possible, somewhat similar to the way in which the state relies on the institutional integration of power relationships.